Welcome back to everybody. I'm so glad you could join us for the second half of the event. I'd like to introduce our third speaker today, Kathi Stringer, a quality improvement specialist. After 23 years of being a key supplier for government subcontractors, she turned her attention to mental health issues, advocating for patients' rights both in the inpatient and the outpatient sector. Ms. Stringer serves on the Seclusion and Restraint Reduction Task Force in Riverside County, which has seen a drastic decline in the use of restraints. She's written and spoken about restraints widely and has authored a book called 5150, One Who Flew Into the Cuckoo's Nest, a true story about restraint, abuse, and victory. Ms. Stringer is also a consumer herself and has had personal experience in multiple hospitalizations and multiple episodes of being restrained. And I just wanted to add a little something also, following up on what Susan Stefan said about my own experience, which is that it is really no accident that my first law review article was on the use of restraints, and that this inaugural event centers on restraints, because I was indeed restrained for long periods of time. Funny story around that, I talked to a professor at Yale when I was writing my note, talking about how degrading and painful restraints must be, because I was not having it. And he said, "Oh, Elyn, you don't understand. These people are psychotic. They're different from you and me. They wouldn't experience this the way we would." And I didn't have the courage to tell him, no, that's not what But I ended up having nightmares for years and years about being restrained. It was highly traumatic. Interestingly enough, in my nightmares, I would somehow get all the staff in the seclusion room and tie all of them down. And then open the doors to the ward, to the hospital, but in my fantasy and dream, the funny thing is not all the patients left. So what does that mean about my ambivalence about hospitals? Anyway, enough with me, let's have
Thank you, and very much, and I'm happy to be here, and thank you, Elyn, for inviting me. It was great, and I'm very happy to meet my co-presenters last night, and it's really great to be in this room with a bunch of other great minds. And we're just going to have a good time, and I'm going to give you some good news from Riverside, California. Okay, to begin with, I think it's on the flyer, a consumer's perspective on restraints, and to begin with, my perspective is it's very abusive, it's very degrading, it's humiliating, and it's painful. Restraints can be very painful. And my view, and the view of many consumers, is make them stop. And that's what my journey is about, how to make them stop. So, to start with, this is a little bit about me, and Elyn kind of went over it. And the machine shop I had, I built parts for Hughes aircraft, and one of the main things that we had to do was quality. It was very important. So that helped me in my future tasks in understanding how to reduce restraints. I never used one of these before. Let's see how this works. Works great. So it's going to be in two parts. We're going to see what's going on at the local level, which would be Riverside, and also what's going on in the state level. Are they within compliance with their own statutory code? I like this. Okay. Local level. Okay. Work began in 2003. What happens, I got a call from Jefferson Transitional Programs, and a consumer named Ashley said, "Hey, Riverside County has got a quality board. Would you like to be on it?" And as many times have I been in restraints, and they're asking me if I'm going to be on a quality board. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, heck yeah, I want to be on a quality board. So sign me up. So the first thing I did is when I got in there and I looked at the quality board and how they did the reports, everything seemed to be passed on through the different members. And they didn't seem to me like they were really understanding what they were looking at. They were just kind of nodding their head. It was like token approved. And to me, it would seem like if you got a report that was in question, it would be an action item. Let's go back next week or next month and let's talk about that. But nobody ever said there was a problem with this and maybe we should look at it again next month. It was just like, oh, okay. And so at one time I thought, my whole reason for being there was the whole thing about reduction restraints. And I said, would anybody have any information about the reduction of restraints, any data, performance indicators? And they were like, restraints from what? So they didn't know, they didn't understand. This is mostly, with them, it's mostly an outpatient, not an inpatient. So this is my opportunity to bring them some, a different perspective and from my view. So there was no information as far as the use of restraints. Even worse when I point it that way. Okay, so the next thing I did, I thought, well, I need to get some data. If I'm going to figure out how the use of restraints, I need to figure out some data so I could put it in Excel and figure out what's going on. So I called the state and I said, how can I get information out of this county hospital? And they said, why don't you put in for a public data request? And they should give it to you in sunshine laws. So I made my legal request for seclusion restraint documents. The request was approved. The data was analyzed. And it was alarming. The amount of, they use restraints, I'm going to show you in just a second, but let me go over this. This is a raw doc, what it looks like. This is how they log loss of personal rights. And 1 through 7 would be like the use of a phone. You can't use the phone, so that might be number 3. And other such items, 1 through 7. Number 8, you see this bold line? Well, that's kind of crossing the line, I would say. 8 would be when they put you in seclusion. And they mark down how many times people were put in seclusion. Number 9 would be restraint. So, talk about a loss of a right, I would say the use of your body would definitely be a loss of a right. So, all this information, I got it in, and then I put it into Excel. So let's see what happened. Okay, so what I wanted to do, I wanted to find out who the top 75 people that were in restraints. I thought that would be the way to start. And this is from the years 2000, 2004. And so if you look at number 1, oh, by the way, these were all medical numbers. And what I did is I went and arbitrarily gave them names, because it's kind of hard to call out a medical number. So number 1, Ron, and this is a short-term hospitalization, probably 2 to 3 weeks. This isn't like months. Ron was in restraints 124 times, right? And then you got August in 2000, Cindy was in restraints 119 times. And then Larry, 94, Amy, 87, and he's got these huge double-digit figures. But I knew it was true because I was in restraints all the time. And I knew it wasn't just me. And I thought, my God, Paul, Ron, look, he's got 124 times, you know? And I thought, more than ever, I was energized to make him stop. So at least I had the information. So that was a good start. I think somebody was asking before about information on restraint usage. Well, at least we got a baseline. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so I wrote a letter to the QIC committee chair, and she was really lousy back then. We got a lot better one now. So I gave the reasons why I thought maybe the restraints, we're having a problem with restraints. And restraint procedures are not strictly enforced, existing policies are not comprehensively understood. And one of them was like staff turnover, fading memories. And I've seen staff will come in, they'll do a restraint, and they'll tell the new person, oh, just kind of watch what we're doing, copy what we're doing, and follow along. That was their orientation protocol for restraints. And I thought that was pretty bad. And so I thought one of the neat things to do, where's it listed? Have a scoring system. So every few months or every 6 months, people that are putting other people in restraints, they have to do a questionnaire. The questionnaire would probably give all the reasons, procedures for putting people in restraints, and most of all, why you should put them in restraints and de-escalation, that kind of thing, and then fill it out. And so this way, when they make a call to put somebody in restraints, and then supervision says, well, why'd you do that? I didn't know. And then you see, you didn't know, huh? So they'll go to their file to kind of look it up. Hey, Ron, you answered this question correctly. What do you mean you didn't know? See, I think that'd be a great way to get accountability for people getting in restraints, has some kind of scoring system. So next. So QI research, I look for QI mechanisms in code policy to effect change. I'm figuring how can I get them to stop? So I got my book out and I started going through code. I thought I'd go treasure hunting. So I found some code and I got that little thing on Google, that little icon. I thought it looked nice and official. Okay, this is what I found. In Title IX, I found number 1810, number 305. And this model is what I use for seclusion restraints. This model could probably work on a lot of different things. Maybe if patients are getting seen like 3 and 4 weeks out, maybe that would be your thing, that maybe get patients seen sooner. So on 1810, 305, I'm just going to go over it real quickly because it's really important. It says a public plan, the MHP, which is a mental health plan. All the counties that opt in, they all have a mental health plan, which means they're mandated also have a quality control board. So a mental health plan is a public planning process of constituency groups, including but not limited to beneficiaries, providers, and beneficiaries' significant support persons as self-identified. That would be like a family member. And nobody could actually debate that because it's as self-identified. So that would be part of the public process. And to formulate the policies and procedures of the MHP, as these procedures are not specifically prescribed in law and regulations. So that means if we want to tell them to stop using restraints, we can do it because who is it? It's the stakeholders. It's us. It's a public process. So we can put that in there. We want you to stop using restraints. So the next cool thing is, okay, we got the public process. We want to stop using restraints. And we go to 1810-425, hospital selection criteria. And the selection of the hospital, MHP may consider but not limited to any of the following in selection hospitals. The ability of the hospital to meet quality improvement requirements of the MHP. So the MHP says we want to see restraint reduction. Hospital criteria, you want our business? We want restraint reduction. Or you don't get our money. Blackmail, what the heck, it works. It's always about the money. Everybody's about the money. And so then we go to 1810-440. And this is the quality board, how this works. It has, let me get where I can see it, has an active involvement in the planning, design, execution. And that would be from the stakeholders, which would be parents, spouses, relatives, legal representatives, and others similarly involved with beneficiaries. So that means we have the stakeholders. That would be, we would have parents, you know, and the spouses, and they would all make up the quality board. Now usually the way it works is you'd have consumers and family members. That was kind of that side. And then you would have the providers and the staff. That'd be kind of that side. And the way we handled it on our QIC board was we had 2 of each group. And so this way, if there was ever a vote, it would only have like 2 people of each one for voting members, so we had a total of 8. So if the issue was ever divided or ever split, it would come out more like a tie. It wouldn't be like the staff would say, 500 staff, well, we got a vote going today, all the staff show up so we can get things, you know, the way we need to do it. So this was really good the way this worked out, and we incorporated that into lowering seclusion restraint. So, skip that one. It's just going over the other one. Okay, now the next one, I thought, you know, this material is pretty good, so why don't we put it into a QIC manual? And let me tell you a little bit about manuals first. In my company, we had to have a manual. If Hughes Aircraft, and I was a key supplier for them and some of the other subcontractors, plus we did some of the commercial companies, if they came out there and sourced us, they would say the first thing is, where's your manual? The manual had to say what happened from the time the order came in, the purchase order, to the job travelers that went through the shop, the final inspection, and the time it got stamped UPS and got sent on a truck. It was the manual. We had to say everything that happened as these parts got built. And that way, if I were to die, someone would know how to continue and run the organization. It was all in the manual. And so when I would go to these counties and I would say, where's your manual? And they'd say, manual for what? I'm like, my God, you know, how can you not have a manual? I don't understand that. So one of the first things I did, question marks over the head all over the place. I thought we should take and get a manual for the California mental health plans. And the way this started, it was a project for the California Network of Mental Health Clients. Now the network is what they're called for short. They're for the state of California, they're an advocacy group. They're split up in different zones, and each zone comes up with a project that they want to do for the year. I suggested, let's make a manual for our project. They approved it, and so that's what I mostly did for the next year is I'd look up federal regulations, federal codes, the federal registers, and state, and I would incorporate all that into the manual. And it helps the beginner to understand the difference between a baseline and a benchmark and performance indicators. A lot of them don't know the difference. I see them on the QIC board, and they would sit there for a year trying to understand it. And a lot of them would drop out, and it was like, whoosh, airplane, goes right over the head. They would never get it. And so this helps them. This helps them understand on how quality works. And I think I was contacted with somebody from PAI, I guess they're called Disability Rights now, and somebody had got a hold of that manual, and they asked if I would, they could put it on their website because they liked it. And I said, well, sure, if you want, I can go out to Los Angeles and do a training. And they said, yeah, why don't you come out and do a training? So they did a teleconference between the 4 other sites. So it's really good. I've had people call and ask if they could use it for their other states, but they would just change it a little bit. And I said, well, sure, go ahead. Anytime we could help somebody. Okay, so the next thing you know, in 2004, after all these things have been implemented, and there's been a lot of advocacy for the reduction of restraints, there has been a serious effort from top management to reduce exclusion and restraint. I mean, when I call a code green, everybody shows up, right? But nobody wants to call hands on the patient for team leader because nobody wants to screw up the numbers. I mean, the numbers are dropping. And it's like, who wants to be the one who messes it up for everybody else? Everybody's been working so hard to get those numbers, and you're going to be the one that's going to mess it up. And so we got a top nurse in there. She does a lot of training. They do a lot of role playing on how to not use restraints. And so then in 2006, we got a new medical director, and he came from the state of Arizona, and I was like, oh my gosh, I heard he's from the state hospital. We're totally screwed. He's going to be putting everybody in restraints. So when I read up on the guy, I found out it was just the opposite, and I was really happy because a lot of the different hospitals were answerable to him, and his whole thing was to reduce restraints, and he wanted them to use their ideas and their creativity to get those numbers down. And a lot of the hospitals, he told me, they got them down to 0. Just down to 0 because they were answerable to him, and that's what he wanted. So when he came on board in 2006, I was pretty happy. Now, there is a question that begs to be asked, and I've heard it said a lot of times locally and throughout the U.S. I've heard it said, restraints are patient-driven. Okay? In other words, this is patients is putting themselves in restraints. This is patient-driven. So with that in mind, let's look at the next slide. Okay, this is Riverside County Psychiatric Hospital. There's been a 1,500% decrease in restraints. In other words, from here to here, it's 15 times lower. And this data has been normalized. And this is a 5150 designated high acuity facility. That means if somebody comes in tripping out on meth or they're just a problem patient, they've been there a bunch, you can't send them down the street like a lot of hospitals can. They'll say our beds are full, or they'll make up some reason. This hospital can't. We've got to take every single person that shows up. Everyone. So, well, what do you think about, I mean, in 2008, last year, they got the NAMI award for zero tolerance restraint. And I was wondering, gosh, you know, that was 700% decrease. Are they going to ever get any better than that? Maybe at that point, it's only going to be 5% lower, maybe 10% lower. But my God, they doubled down, more than doubled down. And it's 15 times lower. What do you guys think about that? Is that good? Okay, so it's been done. Riverside County, there's been a big increase. Let's see what's the next one. Celebration, this is when they got their award. This is when it was seven times lower, now they're at 15. These are all the different people that are part of the Seclusion and Restraint Reduction Task Force. Okay, now I think Riverside, what they're doing could be a model for the Californias, for the counties in California. Now the next step for consideration is I'd like to see everybody start posting data on the internet. And so the question I wanted to know is, what is the state doing? Has anybody ever wondered what the state of California is doing about mechanical restraints? Kind of? Let's see. State level, okay. Okay, it all started with SB 130, a bill that aims to control and eventually reduce the use of seclusion restraints in California. Now, it started in 2002 with a report to the Senate Office of Research entitled Seclusion and Restraint, a Failure, Not a Treatment. And that's just beautiful. Because I've gone to some of the board meetings. This is when I was doing the advocacy in the beginning. I'd show up at those board meetings. I heard one psychiatrist say, well, you know, restraint is a form of treatment. And I'd pop up and back and go, a form of mistreatment. and it's true a lot of times. So, oh, and going back to this one real quick, they said now restraints is patient driven. So you got to ask yourself, did all of a sudden the patients start showing in a hospital better, more well? Or maybe it's the use of restraints is maybe staff driven. You know, if you look at the numbers, it looks like it's staff driven, not patient driven, and that was the point I wanted to make. And so maybe it's getting to a little bit more patient driven way down here because we're eliminating a lot of this. But it's staff driven. Staff is putting the patients in restraints. Just, patients aren't doing it to themselves, for sure. Okay, so we're back to, let's see this one. Okay, then SB 130. Then a hearing came in 2003, the use of restraints and seclusion. And so then they formulated this bill called SB 130, and it became law on January 1st, 2004. And this law is known, if you want to look it up, it's Health and Safety Code number 1180. So I looked up 1180. I was curious to see what, you know, how they put it together. And state requirements, this is what they're mandated to do. Post the following data on the internet: the events of seclusion, the events of restraint, the time spent in those situations, and check it out, the times of involuntary medication. And that means it's involuntary. The patient doesn't want it, the staff is insisting on it, and 5 guys might take them down and give them a shot if they don't want it. And the number of injuries for the patients, the number of staff injuries, and the number of restraint-related deaths. So that's what's required in 1180. So let's see how they stack up. You guys want to know? Okay. This is a screenshot. I did a copy paste, put it in Photoshop, cropped it out, and poured it over into a PowerPoint. So I didn't doctor it up at all. And so I looked at this, and so yeah, we have the number of seclusions, the number of restraints, number of walking restraints, and you know what? That's still restraints. The time in seclusion and restraint, the time in walking restraint, which is still restraints, and the average time in each of those scenarios. And then they have some data charts and emergency medication, which would be the voluntary medication, and seclusion, restraint, staff injuries. So this is what they had. So let's go over them one by one. And before we do that, there's some acronyms for the different hospitals, because if the state's going to put their data on the internet, they're going to put the acronyms for all the different hospitals, and they're going to have the number of events for each hospital. So, for example, Napa State would be NSH, Patton State Hospital would be PSH. Okay? I'm not going to ask you to make sense of this, okay? Because I'm not going to make your guys' brain work that hard. I'm just going to point out some things that are glaring. This is number of seclusions, so they got that. Here, what we're seeing is they got 5 quarters. From 1 in 2008, you have 4 quarters in 2009. So, okay, they got 5 quarters and the number of seclusions. And they've got their graph for each acronym. As I showed you, they represent a hospital. Okay, so we got the seclusions, events on restraints, walking restraints, so restraints, time of seclusion, time of restraint, time of walking restraint. Hey, am I getting ahead of the clock here? Average seclusion time, average restraint time. I'm just showing you that they're actually on the internet. We're not trying to break them down. We will be breaking a couple down later. Okay, the emergency medication staff. And I think somebody was asking about that earlier. Is that track? Well, yeah, it is. And as you see, it looks like it's kind of leveling down across here. But there's really something wrong with this. And you can't see it the way the state presents the information. You'll never see it. And we're going to come back to that later. And this is the emergency medication. Like I said, it's being forced on somebody who doesn't want it. And we have 5 quarters. And then we have the staff injuries. And then we have the raw data. So somebody wants to take this data, put it in Excel, formulate it their way, and see what kind of outcomes they can have. Well, there it is. The state provides the raw data. Okay, so I wonder, how did this state stack up? What does all this data mean? How can we make sense of it? Good question. Well, right off the bat, I did identify 3 problems. Well, it wasn't right off the bat. I just kind of looked at it for a while. And what I came up with, number 1, all the required data is not on the web. Number 2, not enough data to establish a baseline for indicators. And 3, the data is not normalized. So let's go over those one by one. All the data is not required. All the required data is not on the web. First, we compare health and safety code with the required data on the web. You like that, huh? Okay, we got a problem. The state of California at this time is they're out of compliance. They're not doing the good jobs they could be. What's missing? We're missing data on the client injuries. Now, this is the other thing that I've noticed that, you know, when I was in a psychiatric hospitalized, it seems to be like there's this one up, one down. It's like they know all the rules, the patients don't know all the rules, and it kind of keeps them off balance a little bit. And it seems like there's this disrespect. I remember the first time that, one of the first times I ended up in restraints, and I was in a hospital, and the charge nurse says, you need to get out of the hallway. And I'm used to dealing with people at Hughes, and we have this mutual respect between us, just like you would have between your colleagues, right? And so this is what I'm thinking, how people get treated. But there was this air of us versus them, and I didn't make that up. This is just how I felt. So when she said, you need to leave the hallway, and I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, you need to go to your room right now, or you need to go into the day room. And she had this big sour look on her puss. And I just dug my heels in. I mean, because I have self-esteem. You know, it doesn't make sense. I said, well, if I don't move, what are you going to do? She said, well, we've got things for people like you that want to test limits. What the hell is she talking about? I was just standing in a hallway. And so I said, well, I'm not moving, because that's how I felt about myself. My self-esteem was high enough that I didn't look like I wanted to get bossed around, and I wasn't doing anything. And so she called a code, and a lot of people showed up, and she said, she's testing limits, she's not moving, so we need to take it to a different level. Well, I didn't move, so they piled up on me, took me to the room, and tied me down in restraints. And a lot of times I was in restraints because I felt good enough about myself. I didn't want somebody lording over me, pushing me around. I didn't like it pushed around. They felt like they were bullies to me, and I didn't want to be bullied. And so that cost me. I ended up in restraints a lot because of that. So, and when I talk about the one up, one down, us versus them, well, how could the staff has got their injuries listed, but the patients don't? And what about the patient-related deaths? Did anybody die they should have a chart that says 0. How do we know nobody died? And we don't even know how many patients got hurt. So the problem, the state of California at this time, they're definitely out of compliance. Okay, so number 2, not enough data to establish a baseline for indicators. Remember I told you that we only had like those 4 quarters or those 5 quarters? That's it? Well, SB 130 became law in January 1st, 2004. Where the heck did they start from? You know, what did it look? Have we made any improvement? God, we don't know. And why are they only giving us 5 quarters? Where are all these, 19 quarters missing? Why is it necessary to take that off? So we don't know. So we're only getting a snapshot of 1.25 years. So we're missing all this other information. So there's no way we can know if they've actually improved. Have they gotten any better? We don't know. We'll never know. Okay, so that's the one thing, is where it's impossible to, so it's impossible to create a performance indicator. Okay, number 3, the data is not normalized. This is going to be a little technical, but we'll move through it fast. We got patent right here. It says it's 136 restraints, and Vacaville, they got 25 restraints. On face value, if you look at that, it looks like Vacaville's doing a better job. They only got 25 people in restraints. Patent, on the other hand, has got 136 people in restraints. So it looks like Vacaville's doing a better job. So let's go to the next slide. Before we can answer the question, is patent or Vacaville, we must normalize the data. And I want to do a quick review on that, just in case somebody might want to know how that's done. This is where it gets a little technical. Hospital A, 3 restraints. They got 500 bed days. Hospital B, they got 5 restraints, but they got 1,500 bed days. So when you're looking at this, the intent is to think, well, look, Hospital A, they're doing better. They've only got 3 people in restraints, and Hospital B, they've got 5 people in restraints. So A is better. But when you use the formula, the number of restraints divided by bed days times 1,000 equals the restraint per 1,000 bed days. So when we do the formula, it comes out on Hospital A, we got a performance indicator of 6. That means out of every 1,000 patient days, 6 people are put into restraints. And on Hospital B, every 1,000 bed days, 3.3 people are put in restraints. So those are performance indicators. Indicator 1 is 6.0, indicator 2 is 3.3. So Hospital B, even though it's 5 restraints, they did a better job. Got it? I like that guy. I found him on the internet too. Using this normalizing data, let's figure out which hospital performed better, patent or Vacaville. So I'm trying to figure out, how these hospitals relate to each other. At least get some sort of an idea. And I had to call state get bed days. It's not on the website, and I had to go through a special request to get all that information. So you're getting the benefit of that. Okay, the answer is patent. Look at those bed days for patent, 136,796. Again, you won't find that on their website. You're going to have to ask for it. And for Vacaville, bed days is 14,000. So when we do the math, the indicator on patent is 1.0. That means 1 person out of every 1,000 days has been in restraints. And in Vacaville, 1.7 people has been in restraints. So actually, patent did better. Even though it looks like they had more people, 136 versus 25, patent did a better job. Okay? So, to improve SB 130, web on the data, number 1, we need to post the patient injuries and the restraint-related deaths. And why they're withholding that? It feels like it's withholding because it's been like years and it's still not there. And number 2, post the required data to establish the baseline. In other words, where are all those information from all those prior years? I mean, that's the spirit of SB 130. We need to figure out if the state hospitals are improving. Are they getting better? We don't know. We just know where they are in this time in the snapshot. We don't know if they're higher or lower since this became law. Okay, and number 3, I think they should put the bed days on there or normalize the data so we understand what we're looking at. Okay, remember I told you about that voluntary medication? this line here, and I said, it looks like it's kind of going down a little bit. Okay, we got the 5 quarters. And this is, I feel like I'm Nancy Drew here, you know. I wanted to do a little bit of a mystery for me. And so I went back and I got some prior data through special requests. Actually, I had gotten this a few years ago, and I held on to it. So when I did this presentation, I went back and happened to look. So here we go, the next slide. Okay, here's what I did. I normalized the current data. I went back and I got the earlier data. And if you look at this, back in 2006 through 2007, you see where it's flatlined? That is like 5 patients per 1,000 is getting involuntary medication. Why the heck is it going up so much? Does anybody know? So it's going up, 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 and then, you know, a couple of years go by, which it's still about the same height, and it's leveled out. So now it's 25 people per 1,000 are getting, you know, involuntary medicated. So I was wondering, why could that be? I thought, well, maybe they got a new medical director. Maybe he's got more of a no-nonsense approach. Maybe he just wants to have people therapeutically medicated? I don't know. Or the second thing I thought, maybe pharmaceutical company. Maybe they're doing some sort of research and they want to know how people respond to certain medications. Could that be it? I don't know. But it creates a great question for a root cause analysis, which would start with a study question. Why the massive rise in stat medication at State Hospital? Well, one of the things I thought was, maybe if they're medicating people more, maybe the restraints are going down. People aren't restrained as much. So I thought I would check that out. And so let's look at the next slide. So I looked at the restraints, and it's on during that period of time when this is escalating, the restraint went from 2 people per 1,000 to 1.5 persons back up to 2. It's insignificant. There hasn't been no increase or decrease in restraints to speak of. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, other than maybe 3,000 more people every quarter walking around with a shot in their butt for no good reason, I can't understand why there's been this huge increase. So it makes for a great study question. Why? And we still don't know why. It's going to take somebody to call them up and, you know, find out these answers. Yeah, can I get to you after the presentation? Thank you. Okay, so here's the warning. Because the previous data from the state was not available on the web, but only by special request, the viewer has no way to know there's been such a massive rise in involuntary medications, the stat meds. This is why establishing baseline indicators is vital. So for data sharing to be effective, there must be enough data, because we only saw those 5 quarters, to develop meaningful indicators. In the case of California sharing their seclusion and restraint data on the internet, the data is incomplete, and valid indicators consisting of meaningful data range cannot be established. At least that was from my experience based on what they're showing me. Okay, this I think we need to take it to the next level, and Paul Cumming suggested this. Quality improvement, the good news and the bad news. First, the bad news. Because people are unaware, not trained, they're complaining using, well, I call it morality, advocacy. You should do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And how far has that gotten anybody? It's never gotten me very far. So rather than using very effective QI tools and mechanisms to affect change, and that has made all the difference. So the good news, QI works. However, take a nationally led technical advisory and outreach center for QI to succeed in every county. So in other words, it would be great if there was a nationally led go-to center that would help formulate and give people like a package or an idea on how to get change in their particular county or their particular region. And right now, a lot of people they have the energy and they have the intelligence, but there's no like go-to center. And I think Elyn was talking about maybe getting a go-to center. So I'm pretty excited when I heard that. So anyway, that kind of concludes this presentation. And I guess it's, what, for Q&A now?
Yep.
Questions?
When you mentioned about the emergency involuntary medication, will you be following up on that?
Actually, no, I was actually trying to motivate everyone in the room that maybe they could all call up at the same time and follow up on that. Yes. Just call and say, you know, Kathi Stringer just did a presentation and she said you guys are out of compliance and I'd like to get some information about that. I think it was great.
I just want to add a point to the presentation. The CMS regs in 2006 were amended to require all hospitals to report all deaths of anyone who was thought, essentially, if there's any reason to suggest a connection between experience and restraints, including death, they're required to report that to CMS. That has all gone to CMS, and to date, none of that data has been available by CMS, despite a number of organizations to see that occur.
Actually, there was a series of articles in the Hartford Current that about restraint deaths, and the Harvard statistician estimated based on the information that he had that every week in this country 1 to 3 people die from restraints. They aspirate their vomit, they have a heart attack, and choke. This is supposed to be I think it's keeping people safe because it's actually killing more.
That analysis was done by the Center for Risk Analysis at Harvard School of Public Health.
Wow, that must have been a comprehensive presentation because nobody's got any questions. Yes?
I'm assuming you don't have a law degree, but have you ever thought about one?
You know, I've actually thought about it, but it was funny because I got a little story to tell you, and that's when they were doing a commitment hearing, and they were talking about locking up the patients, and they paraded the medical director, the social worker, and the jury is watching all this, and so they finally decided, the judge says, she's like, you have a major case, we're going to throw it out, we're going to let her free. And so when they let the jury go, my public defender said, let's talk to the jury and see how we did. And right away they said, yeah, we want to talk to you. And she asked them, well, what do you think about the medical director? And they said, we don't like him. And she said, well, do you have any questions? And she said, yeah, the whole jury said, where's the patient? We thought you were going to bring in the patient. And we never got to see the patient. And the public defender, Cheryl Thompson, she looked at her and she said, well, she's the patient. And, oh, we thought she was co-counsel.
Other questions? Paul, you want to come back up and we'll open it up for more general? Anybody else have anything? Yeah.
I just wanted to say how much I admire Kathi for being so diligent and for sharing. And thank you.
I also had a question, which was, is there literature, or have you talked to other consumers about their experiences in restraints, and what does the literature show, and what is your experience of talking to people?
Well, my experience from the people that's been in restraining, they start talking about it and they either get really angry or they start having flashbacks, they get triggered, they'll start to cry, or they'll shy away and say, I can't talk about it. It's awful. Well, I could give you a good example of that. I just started reading Elyn's book not too long ago, and last night I got to the part where they were just basically saying, go restrain yourself. Go restrain yourself. And it was very flip the way they did it. It was, if she was depressed, you go on restraints. If you're twirling your hair, you go on restraints. Any kind of some sign, could be psychosomatic, whatever, you're going to go on restraints. Go, and please put yourself into it, or we'll put you in yourself. And I started reading, and I felt I didn't know if to cry or if I didn't know to scream. But I was definitely awake reading your book. And that's kind of the experience that I see from other consumers when they start talking about restraints. It's just a very horrible, horrible experience.
where do you publish your findings? I can't get my residents to even read the OB-GYN literature about depressed women who are pregnant. You know, how do we communicate with each other? We have all this technology out there, and yet it's hard enough when you do a PubMed to read the things in your own field. How do we take this the next step? What ideas do you have from your experiences talking to a mixed audience like this, or from other things you've done to help us get the word out?
I mean, I think one thing to do is what we're trying to do at the Institute. And the psychiatry fellow who's working with John Jimenez is fantastic, and kind of bringing that piece into the picture so that the law students and the gerontology students and so on can see the perspectives of the other disciplines. So one thing is to have institute centers that involve collaboration across disciplines. You have other thoughts?
Well, there are various things to do, and Paul did one of them, for instance. I'm still very grateful and stunned. He asked me to do a grand rounds. And so he was asking somebody who disagreed with some of his points of view from a different discipline to do grand rounds. And I think that there does need to be more courage in trying to get people with different viewpoints to speak to each other in civil ways and sort of set the model for the country, in fact. And it's hard because a lot of patients and ex-patients are so angry that I belong to an organization and we experimentally tried to invite people with different viewpoints, and they got trashed. I mean, it was not a pleasant experience. It was a very pleasant experience for me to do grand rounds. But something more where medical people ask lawyers, ex-patients to do grand rounds, lawyers try and get the perspective of people who do this work. And I honestly, and I've said to people when I've done training, you have no business being a civil rights lawyer for psych patients until you've been on a unit for months. So you have some notion of kind of what people go through and what the dynamic is going on there. So, like I said, I mean, it's hard to blame a staff person who restrains somebody who's swallowing things when the staff person, they don't know what to do. They're not bad people. And I really think that it's important to get past kind of traditional adversarial stuff, because we're all, I think, kind of in trying to accomplish the same thing. I really believe that. I'm not just a Pollyanna. But we need to talk to each other more and more respectfully. Publications, forget it. I mean, I really think you're right. I think it's about talking to people, getting together in conferences, talking about ideas, exchanging email addresses. I think you're right about publications. I barely keep up in my field. I have to read cases. I'm not going to be reading your OB-GYN. I'm sorry.
So let me, I think that's right, but let me give you another example of something that I think represents a way of pulling disparate literatures and expertise together. There's a website out there for the National Resource Center on Psychiatric Advance Directives. And if you Google that, the site will come up. It's a joint effort of two researchers at Duke, Marvin Swartz and Jeff Swanson, and the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law in Washington. So you've got two very different areas and very different perspectives working on this simultaneously. And it is a place where you can go to find out, among other things, what the statutes are in every state in the country dealing with psychiatric advance directives, but also to access the legal literature and the psychiatric literature on the use of psychiatric advance directives. So as one model for a place where people can go to get a bigger picture and cross these lines, I think it's a great
Give the
model.
website again.
Yeah, it's actually nrc-pad.org. And if you take a look at it, I think it does just what you're talking about.
Define your
book before I leave? Because I live, I mean, you know, after this is all over, is there a place I can buy your book? Because I don't get over here that much.
You know, I actually have run out of copies, but you can just call Amazon.
You mean it's in the bookstores, your book?
Yeah. It's called The Center Cannot Hold My Journey Through Madness, and it's at Barnes & Noble and Border.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish I had some.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about people who get admitted to psychiatric hospitals, they're usually in a psychotic state of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And because these illnesses affect the brain, the mind has to make some sort of sense out of what is happening. And because the mind thinks that something or other is happening, then the behavior follows. So we really have two issues. We have the illness and we have the behavior. And all that we're talking about today is really the behavior, which follows out of these erroneous conceptions that the mind makes out of what's going on neurophysiologically in the brain. So we're not really talking so much about the treatment. So my only point being that, you know, we need to be very clear that there are two aspects to what we're talking about. The illness, what's happening neurophysiologically in the brain, and can we, you know, help that? And unfortunately, I have to say, law gets involved because of the behavior, you know, the behavior that communities cannot tolerate because it doesn't fit into the system. So, I don't know, maybe Paul could comment on this sort of dichotomy.
Well, I don't know what to say other than, sure, there are a variety of levels at which we can look at these phenomena, and the kinds of behaviors that we are concerned about are often behaviors that are driven by illness. But you know, many of the stories that you've heard from some of the other speakers today are examples of responses to behavior that may not be driven by illness. The inappropriate use of interventions that, when targeted at illness, can be effective and appropriate for other purposes. And, you know, that's what's so difficult about this area. I doubt that there's anybody who would deny that sometimes when somebody is trying to gouge their eyes out or banging their head against the wall repetitively to the point where they're endangering their own lives, that something doesn't have to be done against that person's will, and that something may be restraint of one form or another when there's no other alternative at that moment. But when we create systems that permit that to happen, we have to be very worried about the application of those approaches to people who are taking off a head nurse because they're standing in the hall and you know, not moving back to their room when somebody thinks they should be moving back to their room. And that is the most difficult aspect of this. And I want to agree with something Susan said earlier. Regulations don't get you there. Because you can never write the regs tightly enough to really be positive, 100% positive that you can encompass one situation and exclude the other. And it really has to be something about the culture, the environment, what people think they're doing, what they're trained to do, what they're rewarded for doing, that gets you that final step where the regs can never go.
I have one example of laws and regs being ineffective, which was at Yale Law School. I was at the Mechanical Law Prof that represented patients in hospitals. And we had the law in Connecticut was that you can only restrain someone if they're imminent physical danger to self or others. And we had a client who, entry after entry in his chart, said, so-and-so wouldn't get out of bed today, so we restrained him. Is that imminent danger? Staying in bed?
One of the comments I wanted to make, and I'm not necessarily contradicting you about neurophysiology, but it makes me uneasy, is having seen so many behaviors that I think are traceable to trauma, to childhood trauma, as opposed to something biological. And maybe trauma has biological implications, but for instance, somebody who goes berserk during night checks I had a client who, somebody would come into their room to make sure they were okay, flash the light at them, and they would jump out of bed and start screaming. That wasn't that was a PTSD-based reaction to things that had happened. It was a flashback. And I really worry that the biological model excludes a lot of childhood stress and trauma and behaviors that don't make sense, except when they're understood as PTSD-like behaviors. I'm not a clinician, so I don't know about the biology of PTSD, but I do know that most of my female clients who are chronically institutionalized and who are those repeat people had some kind of trauma history that never had been resolved, and that's a huge, huge issue.
One of the things, maybe for another get-together, is the political and social and moral context of what we're talking about. One of my personal heroes is Thomas Sachs, whom I discovered when I was in graduate school. Now, he takes things to an extreme, but a lot of what's talked about here, he was writing about in the late 50s, early 1960s, and he, as an MD, he put things in a strong social context. Another, I happen to be a psychologist, just to show how tolerant I am. My other hero was another psychiatrist named Seymour Halleck, who wrote beautifully about the politics of therapy. And the other piece of it, I think of that town in Belgium, I can't remember the name of it, where...
Giel?
What is it?
Giel.
Yeah, that the people sort of taken care of by the community and not put away because of the values and the acceptance and tolerance limits, a tolerance domain or parameters of the people in that society. And I think the point here was raised earlier about people are not on their meds and whatever. That can be dangerous too. If somebody's not on their heart medication or blood pressure medication, they could stroke out and kill someone while driving the car. It's possible. I don't know how often it happens, but it's possible. Why don't we restrain those people? Why don't we force them to take their blood pressure medication? And I think the reason is that we're very frightened people who are different from us. And I think this is the bottom line. And it's a societal issue. You mentioned Cuckoo's Nest, and I happened to intern on one of the wards that Kate Kesey was an aide on. It was a real, I actually met, there wasn't one big nurse apparently. She was a composite. I met one, I mean, she could have been a big nurse, and she was there. And I was like a moth to the flame. I just wanted to engage her in conversation. But I could leave at the end of the day. And that felt, very, very different. But I think of, the hero of that book and what happened to him. I'm blocking his name, but Jack Nicholson. The name of the character that Jack Nicholson played. I mean, that was MacArthur. Now we could say that he was a psychopath or whatever. Well, so what? So what? He was a psychopath. It's an unpleasant kind of person to be around. They're kind of scary. But, any university faculty has only a psychopath. I mean, it's true.
Not naming names.
They're white-collar psychopaths. Businesses have psychopaths or whatever. But we tend to think of a blue-collar psychopath, and they tend to be more physically violent, whatever. But, I don't know, I'm straying a little bit because it's really beyond my mind. That I think a lot of this, and the final thing I'll say is the DSM, and with all due respect to the other, what we call the other APA, we psychologists call the other APA, that is growing every edition, and it's medicalizing or psychiatrizing what might be normal variations of human conduct. And that, I think, is one of the most negative influences in our society and worldwide, because we're leaders in this field. And I think this needs study as well, because that's part of what gets people involuntarily committed. It's part of what gets people labeled as stigmatized, so that behavior that, if you're not in a hospital, it might be viewed as, annoying or nervy or whatever, or funny. And I find your account funny. I was imagining it. I found it humorous, and yet you were labeled a patient. You're in the hospital, so what you're doing is a reflection of your mental illness, and we have to treat your mental illness. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
I'm a senior psychologist at California Department of Mental Health. And I agree that. Good evening. I'm Elyn Saks, and I'm senior psychologist at California Department of Mental Health. And I completely agree 100% that 7 out of 10 times the call for restraint or seclusion is an arbitrary decision. It's either by a staff who is fearful, has no other option, and sometimes also the staff, it's a control issue. But the passion that's driving this, I think, just by eradicating seclusion and restraint without finding proper replacement about what staff are supposed to do may lead to injuries and other things that you're underestimating. And you pointed out all the numbers, but I really question what are the numbers of the injuries of the programs that have attenuated restraints and seclusions. Is that also correlated with number of injuries and other negative consequences?
The research in Massachusetts was that staff injuries went down, staff turnover went down. Where I agree with you, and I brought this up, is if you do this, if you just send a mandate, you will lower restraints. And you don't have training, you don't explain to people how to do it, and the staff aren't invested in it, they will find other ways. If there's a control culture, and they're told you can't do the control culture by restraint, the control culture will express itself in other ways. That's why I said you've got to have a change of culture. And what we saw in Massachusetts, the 2 bad results of reducing restraints were not staff injuries, but as I said, first of all, the arrest of certain patients and basically criminalizing that behavior. That was a serious problem. Also, patients who are known to be problems who come into emergency departments are now, the emergency departments are having a much harder time finding beds because hospitals don't want to take people who they worry will increase their restraint data. So you always have to look out for the consequences of these things, but I think if you can change the culture, everything goes down. The use of PRNs, involuntary interventions go down as a whole. And I wanted to commend you for having the beginning of the talk be about coercion as a whole. Because I think you've got to see restraints as part of a system of control and coercion.
The real, there's no question that reducing restraints, reducing seclusion is a good thing. The danger from at least the mental health professional perspective is the assumption, which sometimes we're told, that if less is good, none is the best. And that may not be true. There may be some small but irreducible number of instances in which it's an emergency. Nothing else is likely to protect either the person themselves or the people around them, and restraint or seclusion, whatever modality is used, is the right thing to do. Challenge is limiting that, but not limiting that. And I will tell you my experience. Some years ago, I was told of a hospital that had eliminated seclusion and restraint. Their numbers were 0. And I was very puzzled about how they had done that. And I talked to the person in charge of the facility, and I said, well, now, you must have people who at times are just completely out of control. What do you do with those people if you're not using seclusion and restraint? And he said, we transfer them to the forensic. And here that's Patton, right? The one with all the high numbers. So, I mean, one really has to be very careful in looking at some of these numbers and in understanding a system as a whole. Are they just transferring the problems, or have they really found an effective way of dealing with it?
I know there are other questions, but I think we need to stop, and maybe the panels will speak to people at the wine and cheese. So thank you so much.
For the last 2 years,